and welcome back to Anne's Family Recipe. So I am currently 38 weeks pregnant and I thought it would be a good time to stock up my freezer with some meals that we can use once the baby arrives. So today I am sharing our family's new favorite chili recipe, something that's very easy to freeze. Also this incredible kind of creamy and cozy chicken cordon bleu casserole that's pretty easy to put together. And then lastly, I'm making some basic breakfast sandwiches with sausage, egg, and cheese. So let's get cooking. For the chili recipe, I am starting by dicing up some vegetables. So overall, I am tripling the original recipe, although I'm only doubling the veggies. I have 2 onions, 2 bell peppers, 1 red and 1 orange, and then 4 garlic cloves that I'm going to chop up finely. I have a large pot over about medium heat. I added a couple tablespoons of olive oil and then added in the diced vegetables and sauteed those for a few minutes until they started to soften. I added the garlic in last because you don't want that to burn. So give the onions and peppers a few minutes, and then for the last 30 seconds or so you can add in the finely chopped garlic. Next up is 3 pounds of ground beef. This was actually a lean ground beef. I think it was like 93% lean, 7% fat, and it was on sale at my grocery store for $2.99 a pound, which around here is an incredible deal. So I'm just using my wooden spoon to break the meat up, and then I let it start to brown. Next up, I'm working on all my canned goods, and I just wanted to kind of remind you, if you don't do this already, take a damp paper towel and just wipe around the perimeter of the lid of your cans before you open them, because there can be a lot of dust and dirt that collects on the store shelves, and you don't want that to get into your food as you use your can opener to open them. So you saw I cleaned off my kidney beans, but I have a lot of other things going on here. I have 3 cans of kidney beans, 3 cans of black beans, and 3 cans of fire roasted tomatoes. While the meat was browning, I added the spices and seasonings. So that started with 3 tablespoons of brown sugar, which I think is kind of unique to this recipe. I like that little bit of sweetness in the background. And then 3 tablespoons of a classic chili powder. Then 3 tablespoons of ancho chili powder, which has a smokier flavor. Then I also had smoked paprika, and I added 1 heaping tablespoon of that, and a tablespoon of cumin, and a tablespoon of onion powder. So lots of flavoring happening in here. I started with about a teaspoon of salt, but I'm sure I added more as the cooking process progressed, and then a little bit of black pepper too. I did omit cayenne pepper. There are also supposed to be green chilies in this recipe, and I took those out too. I didn't want it to be too spicy. I'm already taking a little bit of a risk with the acidity from the tomato products here because I'll probably be eating this when I'm nursing the new baby, but I didn't want to have any intensity of a spiciness in the dish in case that would bother the baby. I'm taking my canned beans over to the sink, draining and rinsing them. I did that with both the black beans and the kidney beans, and then added them in. Then I added in 1 can of tomato paste and all 3 cans of fire roasted tomatoes. These have great flavor. I did not drain those because you want the juices from them. For additional liquid, I added in 1 container of beef stock. You could also use beef broth. I just found that at my store, the stock had a little less sodium, so I went for that option. And then this recipe calls for Worcestershire sauce, which is another sort of unique ingredient I don't always find in chili recipes, but I love it. It's so savory. So this has 3 tablespoons of Worcestershire, and then I stirred that all together to combine. Then I brought it to a boil, reduced it to a simmer, and allowed it to cook for about 30 minutes. And this recipe is fantastic. Some toppings ideas for serving are sour cream, shredded cheddar cheese. We love having Fritos scoops, or you could do tortilla chips on the side for dipping. They're a great combination. You could also have some fresh cilantro or lime juice. It's really, really tasty. Everybody in my family loves this recipe. So once the chili had cooled down, I used this fun little gadget I can link for you down below. It holds a gallon-size freezer bag open so that you can fill it easily without making too much of a mess. I had a little bit of spillage, but I was trying to move hastily and it dripped down the side a little bit. But overall, it is really helpful, especially if you don't have a second set of hands right by you to hold the bag open as you're scooping out whatever you want to freeze. So then I tried to get as much air out of the bag as possible, zipped it up, and it was ready to go in the freezer. For the chicken cordon bleu casserole, I started with 4 large chicken breasts in a shallow pot, covered them by at least an inch with water, brought the water to a boil, and then put the lid on and took it off the heat and let these sit for about a half an hour. They were quite large, so they did need to sit for a little bit of time so that they would cook through. So this is a simple poaching process that I found online that worked pretty well. You definitely want the internal temperature of the chicken breast to be at least 165 degrees. Some of my chicken breasts were a little bit thicker than others, so I did have to let them go a couple extra minutes. But the meat was very tender, and once it cooled, I could cut it or shred it pretty easily. So next up, I'm shredding up lots of cheese for this casserole. So each one is going to take a brick of Swiss and a brick of sharp cheddar. And I know a lot of people have this really cool cheese grater gadget from Amazon that I've thought about buying. It's sort of like a hand crank, but I already own a food processor and it has the grating feature in it. So I thought, you know what, let's just use it. And it went so fast. My arms were very grateful that I chose to do this instead of hand grating all this cheese myself. Next up, I'm prepping 2 boxes of chicken stuffing mix. I have some butter and water in a measuring cup. I melted that together until it was hot. I poured that over the stuffing mix and stirred it all together to soften the bread and just gave it a few minutes to sit so that the bread would really absorb all of that liquid. Since I'm doubling this casserole recipe, I doubled the sauce. So that was 2 cups of milk, 2 cans of cream of chicken soup, and I whisked that together. And later I added in a tablespoon of dried parsley. I forgot at this point in time, but I didn't before I added into the casserole. So my chicken had cooled, I was able to handle it easily, and I diced it up into cubes. So I used 2 large chicken breasts per casserole. I made 1 casserole for dinner that night, and then I'll show you in a minute, I assembled the other one in an aluminum pan to freeze for later. So I put the 2 diced chicken breasts into the bottom of a greased 9 by 13 inch casserole dish. And then the recipe calls for Montreal chicken seasoning. I had this Northwood seasoning. My husband was gifted this at Christmas time from Penzeys Spices, which is in the Pittsburgh area. And it is so good. This was the perfect seasoning blend for this chicken dish. I loved it. And then I took about a half a pound of deli ham and diced that up and sprinkled it over top of the chicken. Next, I sprinkled about 2/3 of the shredded cheeses over top of the meats. And then I remembered to add the dried parsley, so I did that, whisked it in, and I poured half of the sauce over this casserole. Then I sprinkled half of the prepared stuffing mix over top. And lastly, I put the rest of the cheese all over the surface of the casserole. It got nice and golden and melty while it baked. So if you're making this right away, this bakes at 350 degrees for about 45 to 50 minutes. You can always cover it with foil so it doesn't get too brown as you're baking. So for the second pan, I'm going to assemble this ahead of time, and then I can thaw it out and bake it at a later time. And if you're going to do that, it might need a little extra time. You want to keep it covered just in foil while it bakes, and then for the last 10 or 15 minutes you can remove the foil so that the stuffing and the cheese gets a little golden brown on top. So to package this up, I had 1 layer of plastic wrap, and then I had 2 layers of aluminum foil. So I kind of wrapped one up from the bottom and then the other one over the top. And then I decided to write the cooking directions on top so that I wouldn't have to dig for the original recipe when the time came for me to bake this. This casserole was awesome. It was perfect for a cold winter day, super creamy and comforting. I absolutely loved it. Pretty much everybody in my family enjoyed it. It's basically like a classic chicken and stuffing casserole, but I love the taste of the Swiss cheese in there, just something a little bit different. And of course the ham is a wonderful salty addition as well. So I served this up that night for dinner with some green beans on the side. And that's something, if you're preparing like freezer casseroles like this that maybe don't have veggies already in them, just have a few bags of frozen veggies on hand in your freezer too that you can grab when you're ready to prepare your casserole so you have a complete meal. Lastly, I'm making breakfast sandwiches. So I'm starting with 12 eggs that I will whisk together with a little bit of heavy cream and some salt and pepper. I poured the eggs into a greased 9 by 13 inch glass baking dish and then baked these at 325 degrees for about, I think it was 18 to 20 minutes, and it worked out perfectly. Just make sure you grease the bottom of the pan really well so that they come out, but then you can cut them into little squares and use them on each of your sandwiches. Next up, I cooked my breakfast sausage, and I wanted to do it all in one pan, but I didn't really have enough room to smash them down as they cooked. So you'll see that they kind of become these little pucks as I'm cooking. So you add a 1/4 cup of water and steam them first to sort of cook them through, and then you remove the lid and cook them on both sides. The moisture will evaporate and then they'll sort of brown on both sides. But later on I decided to slice these in half so that the meat could cover a little more surface area inside the sandwich. Here are the scrambled eggs out of the oven. I think it's a really smart way to feed a crowd and cook them easily all at once. So I divided these into 12 fairly equal squares for my dozen breakfast sandwiches. Next up, I'm toasting a dozen English muffins, and I buttered one side of each muffin with some salted butter and then closed it up so that it would melt together, just for a little extra flavor. I also sliced up some sharp white cheddar cheese. This is probably my favorite kind of cheese, and it really adds a lot of flavor to these sandwiches. So now I just have to assemble them. I started with a square of the scrambled eggs, my sausage, so here I am cutting it in half, and then it'll cover a little bit more of that sandwich. It worked out perfectly. And a couple slices of cheese, put the lid on top, and if I'm being totally honest, I ate this sandwich right then and there, and it was delicious. The one thing I did decide, though, was to add more cheese when I made the rest of them. So I found these Reynolds wrappers. I had these from years ago, and I never really used them for anything, so I thought this was the perfect opportunity to wrap up each individual sandwich. So again, we've got the buttered toasted English muffin, some egg, the meat. You don't have to use sausage here. You could use some ham or some cooked bacon. Put the cheese on top, put the lid on the English muffin, and then wrap them up tightly. I did make a couple with no cheese, so I labeled those for my daughter. So I put 6 sandwiches into each gallon-size freezer-safe bag, took as much air out as I could, and then zipped it up. When it's time to cook these sandwiches, you can take one out, take the foil off, wrap it up in a damp paper towel, and then heat them for about 1.5 minutes or until cooked through in the microwave. If you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you so much for joining me here today in my kitchen, and I'll see you again soon.